Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Pickleball Krewe. We are a group of pickleball fanatics based in southeast Louisiana and are passionate about all things pickleball everywhere. Our focus is to inform, acknowledge those who help build the game regionally, and promote tournaments in our area. We do our best to present this with a love of the sport, a sense of humor, and a lot of fun. So join Vicki Wynn, Ken Wynn, Jeff Fuchsia, and me, Bud Klein, in our latest episode. We are glad you are along for the ride. The crew opens this episode welcoming a special guest who will talk to us about some of the physical aspects of playing pickleball. Jeff has another one of his insightful Burr under my saddle, and Vicki will share a shout out to all of our medical professional pickleballers. Ken will wind us up with his previews of local and regional tournaments. This should be a very interesting episode, so stay with us. All right, everybody, welcome to the 31st episode of the Pickleball Krewe. We've got a special guest today, and I'll let Ken introduce him.
We're fortunate enough to have our guest, Craig Teeter. Craig, you got a lot of letters behind your name here. I'm looking at your business card. So we wanted to kind of start just by introducing you. I mean, we met you at the pickleball courts at Pelican Park, and one of the better players out there. So it's always fun getting in games with you. But then we discovered that you're also a physical therapist and amongst other things, which we'll let you describe. And I even had the firsthand experience of being a patient at your facility. So why don't you just tell us, when did you get started in pickleball? And also tell us a little bit about how your professional career and how you got started there.
Absolutely. So I kind of stumbled on pickleball during COVID when we didn't have access to gyms. There wasn't a lot going on. And me and some of my neighbors got together and everything was outside. So we just said, let's try this pickleball thing out. And I kind of laughed inside because I didn't know anything about pickleball whatsoever, other than I knew a couple people who played. And I just jokingly referred to it as retired tennis, not knowing any better. So we got out there, played a little bit, met a couple of the regulars out there and kind of understood the rules. And after a couple weeks, I was hooked, and I had to eat my words because I can say honestly, pickleball is a lot of fun. So I've just been trying to evolve the game and watch some of you guys and how you're playing, and just try to be a sponge and seeing how people play and what they're doing, and trying to get a little bit better with the form and some of the nuances of the game to go from being that guy that just comes out wanting to hit everything hard to trying to understand the finesse and some of the art of the game. And as I've understood that and played it more, I've grown to love the game a lot more, trying to play it the right way.
That's great.
Yep.
So,
Craig, before we get into your professional side of things, you can throw a pickleball at about 120 miles an hour. You've got to have another sport in your background. Did you play professional or college baseball?
I played some college baseball, and I was a pitcher. So I have that love that I did all the way up until my early 20s. And then physical therapy became the focus of where life was going to go. So I realized that was going to have a lot better future for me than trying to go any other direction. So the smart part of my brain decided to kick in and look for a career, and I've really enjoyed it. As far as physical therapy, kind of going back into it, like a lot of people with that do physical therapy, there's usually a story, a family member, or some kind of personal thing that kind of takes place that kind of gets you into that. And for me, I got hurt my senior year, and kind of sidetracked some of the path that I might have been on for baseball, and not being able to play at my best for that senior year. So I wanted pre-med, and I wanted to go and be a doctor and stuff like that. And as I got into undergrad at Louisiana College in Central Louisiana, I realized that I wanted to have a little bit better work-life balance of doing something in the medical field, but still being able to do things like pickleball, softball, and things of that nature, being more available for family time and my kids and stuff like that. So I thought back about some of my experience and remembered the physical therapy and what it did for me to getting back to baseball. And that was a direction that kind of struck me. So I went that direction, and kind of that's how I got here. From Louisiana College, I got into LSU medical school in New Orleans. That's a health science center, and did physical therapy there as a master's program at the time. And then from that point, I moved to the now North Shore, and I have been working as a physical therapist now for almost 23 years.
Wow.
That's great.
So for some people, some of the viewers, they may not necessarily know a lot about physical therapy. So I wanted to kind of let them know, like, as far as like an outpatient kind of physical therapy, what does that mean? Or if you had an injury, how would you go about trying to get access to that? If that's okay.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Sure.
So typically, if you have an injury, a lot of it's going through your insurance. There is some direct access issues, workers' comp, different things like that. But for the audience that we're talking about, most of the time it would be having an injury of some point, whether it's pickleball related or just a generic musculoskeletal injury, neck, back pain, ankle pain, knee pain, shoulder pain, whatever, having a doctor write a script for a referral, and then going to the physical therapist or physical therapy location of your choice, just like you would do for your pharmacy or anything like that. So you don't have to be told to go to any one place. You can do one of your choosing or go through a recommendation, providing that they have benefits through your insurance carrier. From that point, based off of what's going on, the physical therapist a lot of times is going to get some history on you to kind of find out your health history, any medical history, surgical history that's going on, to kind of get to know you and your background, what you do for a living, what kind of movements you do, and kind of get an idea of what injury has taken place and what in your life might be affecting that because you can't do it, or might be a part of the problem, and try to kind of come up with ways, whether it's talking about body posture, ergonomics, strength, range of motion, mobility, things of that nature. And then as they go through that evaluation, they'll look at range of motion, strength, mobility of your joints, soft tissues, flexibility, balance, any of these deficits, limitations, and kind of create a problem list. And from that problem list, develop goals to try to help reach the obtain and cure those deficits, or at least treat those deficits. And included in that would be what your goals are. So somebody may have surgery and have a goal that they want to get back to playing pickleball. So, or they want to try pickleball. So we might have to see if that's a legitimate goal based off of what's going on, and try to help them reach that. And then kind of go from there. And then once we reach that, some of that physical therapy might entail addressing some of those limitations, and then maybe even going through some functional movements to try to see if they can do some of those movements on the pickleball court to see if they can be successful with that. If that's something that's included in their goals. And then if we reach those, then have them discharged and graduate from physical therapy, and hopefully move on to a better quality of life.
Sounds great. Craig, you mentioned different therapies, and for those of us who've been through it, it's exercises, massage, TENS unit, dry needling. It's a combo approach. Am I right?
It can be. Some of it is trying to ascertain like what's appropriate for each patient. And sometimes they'll come in and like, well, I heard about this ultrasound or dry needling things. And like, sometimes it's very appropriate for what's going on. And sometimes maybe it's just a piece to the puzzle. And you might have somebody who's like, they did this and it worked great for them. And some of the reality is that every thing that we come across is a case by case basis. And we're trying to find out, like, is that a piece that will really just help them feel better, or and get over like maybe an acute episode, or do we have a chronic issue and that may calm down some of the acute like symptomatic pain and spasm type things that are going on, but is there a bigger picture that needs to be addressed because there are some of these range of motion, flexibility, strength, endurance, tolerance deficits? Are there overuse things that are going on, poor body mechanics that are taking place, so that we can try to address some of that big picture along with that acute smaller picture, because getting somebody pain-free is nice, but having them come back and having that same problem is not good for them. And we don't want to go through this roller coaster or circuit of just doing the same thing over and over again. So I try to at least educate them on the small picture and then the bigger picture. And sometimes people just have time for the small picture, and it can take a while to get to that big picture. But I at least want to educate them on, that, so that they can make an educated and informed response to what I'm trying to communicate to them.
So since you've been playing pickleball now since 2020-ish, three plus years, almost 4 years, from what we've all read, because of the growth of the sport, there's also been a growth in injuries.
Absolutely.
So from pickleball, all the paddle racket sports, what are you seeing? Is there kind of a particular type of injury you're seeing more of than you have in the past due to pickleball?
Some of I've read up on some of it that I'm seeing, some of it I'm hearing, just communication out on the courts, not necessarily stuff that has come across in the clinic specifically, but I think more stuff I've come across just being in the group play out there at Pelican Park and hearing some of that. Some of it hasn't been as serious, which is good, but some of the stuff that I've been reading up on is one of the things for people who are getting into pickleball, that especially if they're new, is that they look at the court size and may not think of the potential demands that pickleball might place on their bodies, but it is a very fast pace of play, potentially. And because of that fast pace of play, you may have people specifically, like we talked about, that the big body of people that are coming into the sport are potentially 50 years or older. And so that fast pace of play with unaccustomed movements, overuse movements, overload movements can play into it. And so that unaccustomed movement can come into somebody who hasn't really exercised a lot or hasn't done a lot of squatting, pivoting, twisting type motions, and they get sprains, strains, and overuse injuries that kind of repetitively get in there because they haven't really kind of built up into that. That can get into the overuse because they may be able to do it for 5 minutes, but then they stay out there for half an hour, and then they end up having aches that occur from that. And then you can get into the overload, which the fast pace of play, you can get fatigued. And as you get fatigued, your muscles are not functioning as optimally, or you can go for that quick movement that creates an overload because of fatigue, or it's just faster than your body's ready for. And that can result in the more traumatic injuries. And then that's the stuff that's scary, because that's leading to more surgery type stuff. Of the injuries, some of the lower body injuries that are kind of common, I'll go from like lower to upper, would be plantar fasciitis, ankle sprains,
Know about that.
ankle sprains, Achilles injuries, calf strains. You can get into aggravation of knee osteoarthritis because of the twisting motions that are taking place. You can have meniscal injuries or MCL, LCL injuries that are taking place because you're in that squat loaded position and the rotational forces that are taking place moving in the lateral directions. Low back pain, aggravated. I see some of it, especially with some of our newer players, that their form is not good, and you don't see them using their legs a lot, and they're a lot bending over at the hips, and so they get a lot of fatigue in their back. And then you got potential disc injuries because of all that flexion that they were putting on their back repetitively. Hip injuries, hamstring injuries. Getting up into the upper body, you can get a lot of like wrist sprains, strains, stuff like that, repetitive type stuff. And getting the golfer and tennis elbow, rotator cuff injuries. And then lesser stuff was like stuff happening from like eye injuries from like being hit with the pickleball, or paddle injuries from paddles hitting, or people swinging maybe recklessly or not communicating on the courts during some of that. So that's some of the stuff that's out there that's been reported, more so on a gross scale, and then there's more minor stuff, but those percentages seem to be way down compared to the other stuff I mentioned.
Craig, any
Go ahead.
research
I'm
on what are like the top 2 or 3 injuries?
Yeah, so the one of the studies cited that 91% of the injuries recently reported, I'm assuming this isn't like within the last year. I didn't go into the bottom of it to see like what the time period was. With 91% of the injuries in this study was showing 50% and 50 years old and older. And that of those, 33% were sprained strains of those repetitive quick type movements and stuff like that, of unaccustomed movements or overuse injuries. And then you're getting into fractures as 28%, and then bruises, contusions was smaller at 11%. Some of the things with fractures that take place with that 50 years and older population was looking at like potential falls because of balance related issues with some of those movements, and then potential like hip fractures, compression fractures. And then females more than males potentially because of bone density related to that elderly population with osteoporosis.
Right.
Very interesting.
Two of the more common injuries that we have seen right at Pelican Park. I have several people come up to me talking paddles because the paddles they're playing with is kind of causing a tennis elbow issue with them, and they're asking me, "Is there a paddle that you can recommend because of my tennis elbow?" And I've had tennis elbow from tennis, and that's the kind of thing where you just need to rest and lay off. And sometimes having too light of a paddle can affect tennis elbow. But the other thing that's even closer to home is falls. I've fallen, Vicky's fallen. We've had my sister fall and break her wrist. Julie Brown fell and broke her wrist. So falls on that pickleball court have been pretty common at Pelican Park, and unfortunately with some breakage that went along with it, and that's really unfortunate. So I don't know if squats are something to work on balance that can help from falls. Some falls are inevitable, but maybe some falls are preventable. I don't know.
Getting into like some of the preventative stuff that I wanted to touch base with, and that kind of feeds into like some of the stuff that you've kind of alluded to, was as like potentially like your entry level player or interest, and then kind of building up from that. Speaking to that population, is recognizing your physical limitations, knowing what is it that you're doing currently, how much have you done it, and like what are your goals with picking up the sport? Are you wanting to get into friendly, hitting the ball over the net a few times with some family members and real friendly? Or are you wanting to get into a little bit more of a higher level recreational component, or trying to get into more competitive stuff, and then trying to match and transition and grade that some of those limitations and build that up to meet what some of your goals and your expectations are, so that you're trying to reduce that unaccustomed and overuse type of injury. So you don't have somebody that says like, I want to run a 5K, and the first day they go and run a 5K, and they push to failure, and failure is not a good thing to find, quite honestly. Training appropriately, and then with training, like building up with squats. One of the things with our older population that can play in is that we tend to lose some of our ankle mobility, in addition to knees and hips and stuff like that. So a lot of times when I'm assessing some of my older population, one of the first things that I'll do is look at their ankle mobility and find out, do they have good ankle mobility? Do they have good flat calf flexibility and range of motion? Because if they don't have the ability to move their ankles up into dorsiflexion to clear past neutral, then they're going to compensate at their knees and their hips. And what that turns into is somebody standing with weight on their heels, pointing their toes down, locking their knees, and bending over at the hips, because they can't get their knees over their toes in a squat position. And then it affects the rest of the chain further up. So making sure you've got some of that mobility. And so sometimes we get people who have pain in their hip and their back, and they don't realize that it started at their foundation. And maybe some of those ankle injuries or those plantar fasciitis, calf stuffs are going on because they don't have the motion in their ankles that they need. So trying to get some of that before they get into trying to get into that squat position, that athletic position to play the sport, can be important and probably overlooked more times than not. Take time to warm up, take time to stretch, and make sure that you don't stretch cold. Make sure that you're warming up, moving around, getting blood flow into your muscles, and then stretching some of those tissues after you've got some blood flow into it, and make sure that the muscles aren't fighting the stretch. You can feel like there's an actual give in those muscles as you're stretching, and not feeling like there's a hard stop when you get to the end. You should feel that you can put a little load on those muscles and it slowly relaxes and it stretches. And if you're not getting that, it's probably the muscles locked up, or you're not warm enough to stretch that appropriately. Good equipment, which you talked about with the paddles, making sure that we got good shoes. Some people may get out there and they're not wearing court shoes, and they don't have the foundation, the stability on the courts to do the rotational movements that they're doing. Their running shoes or whatnot are not providing that stability that they need. Braces, if they need to have braces for the knees, the elbows, stuff like that. And then getting into your training and stuff like that, don't ignore the form. I mean, I've heard you guys training some of the new players and try to learn to use the big muscles. And you get a lot of new players that get real wristy, and they start rotation at the trunk instead of rotation through the hips, and not using the big shoulder muscles for some of those hits, and trying to, if either get some training or get with a player with more experience to maybe try to hand some of that knowledge onto them. Another thing is exercise recovery, and knowing that after you have exercise, you cool down, make sure you're stretching, as you play. If you're sitting in between sets, try not to sit for several minutes and then get up and just try to pick up where you left off. Spend a couple minutes warming up, so that you're not kind of going out there stiff and achy and then creating some of these aches along the way, and then kind of shutting your day or finishing off being more sore than you anticipated being. Those can be really important. And then make sure for people who aren't used to playing for a while, put some rest breaks in there so that you can recover and find out if your body's telling you that you're done, or if you need some rest time. Outside of that, I looked at some stuff as far as my daughter's on a soccer team, and there's a nutritionist that I've talked to, and we've talked about like hydration and everything like that. And that's always things that as far as nutrition and hydration. And I had a couple points that I wanted to share with you guys as far as that goes as well. And
Sure.
generally, half your body weight in ounces per day is what you should be drinking in water. So half your body weight in ounces per day, and you want to make sure that your urine is clear. If you're not meeting those two, then you're probably not having enough fluids to make sure you're checking both of those boxes. Exercise wise, as far as like people want to know about water versus Gatorades and stuff like that, typically for the pace, unless it's really hot and we're playing out there and during the summer, where the heat is really 110 plus and we're sweating a lot and losing electrolytes, generally you shouldn't be getting into your Gatorades until you've been sweating for more than an hour. There's really not a lot of electrolytes to replenish until you've been out there for a good bit.
Wow.
And then as far as your...
So you drink water up until then, Craig?
Basically drinking water up until you get to about an hour's worth of exercise, continuous exercise work. And it varies depending on how much you're sweating, because some people like myself will go out there and it's hot and I can walk out there and I'm sweating already. And some people really have to work into a good sweat. So that you got to base off of really how much you're sweating and how much electrolytes you're losing to kind of match that, what that need is. And then meals, avoid for people who might be doing tournaments or going out there on like a Saturday morning, Sunday morning, Friday morning for like several hours. Avoid those bigger meals. Don't eat those more than 90 minutes before you get ready to play, so you have enough time to digest that before getting into moving around and stuff like that. And then during the breaks and stuff, if you're out there for a couple hours playing, healthy snacks, very light stuff to help you kind of replenish would be like your bananas, your fruit, your almonds, Cliff Bars, things of that nature that will really kind of help you recover, but not weigh you down too much as your body's getting out there and having to work and sweat.
That's all great information.
Yeah, it saves a lot of money too. Drink half water, half Gatorade. I can save a little money there.
Yeah,
because I usually bring out 2 bottles of Gatorade, and that's what I drink when I'm playing. And I start after the first break. So that's good information there.
Absolutely.
I didn't realize that. I did want to say, interesting what you said about plantar fasciitis. I had it really bad about a year ago. It was so bad that when I got out of my truck after playing and I got home, I could barely walk.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found couple of things really helped. And I don't even realize it until you said it. When I started drilling with Vicki and those guys, and I started learning to squat when I hit instead of just hitting standing straight up, that may have had some impact on it. But the biggest thing was changing my shoes and the arches in my shoes. that helped more than anything. And I'm a big advocate now. I tell people, watch your arch support in your shoes, because that to me made all the difference when I got into that.
Yeah, I mean, plantar fasciitis is super common thing, whether it's runners, athletes of different sports across the board. And a common component of plantar fasciitis ends up being so obviously some of your body mechanics that go into it, like you alluded to, with like getting into more of a squat. As you're in that squat, your knees aren't locked, and then you're not overusing your toe and your calf muscles, your arch muscles, to kind of stabilize. You're got a little bit of a squat and you're using more body parts. And then a lot of times as you're overusing your calf muscles, those calf muscles get tight. And when you lose mobility in one spot, you start to try to find it somewhere else. And that's usually when the plantar fascia gets lit up, is that the underside of your foot is trying to make up for the lack of motion that you don't have in your calf. And then you really start irritating the underside of that foot. And then that arch support helps to make sure you're not flattening that plantar fascia as much. So it gives you some support. And then that squat, make sure that you're not overusing your calf nearly as much as well. But when you're not overusing the upper calf muscle with your knee straight, as you're in that squatted position, you are using that lower soleus muscle a little bit more. And a lot of times people don't strengthen the calf in the two different ways, with your knee straight and your knee bent. So you're hitting both of those different muscle groups separately. I'm not sure if that's clear what I mean by that.
Yeah, it is. It is very clear. I mean, you made a lot of sense there. But like I said, for me, the biggest thing was changing shoes.
I think you also might be reversing the stretch as well. In other words, you're stretching the muscle out with your knee down and forward, but then you're also stretching in the reverse with it bent.
Yeah.
You're stretching two different ways on the same muscle, back and forth.
Yeah, with the calf muscle, the upper calf muscle, when your knee is locked, if that muscle is tight, you're going to lose the ability to pull your toes up towards you, because that muscle is a two joint muscle. So it helps to bend your knee, but it also helps to point your toes down. So when you lock your knee, you're already stretching the muscle partially. And when you pull your toes up, you're finishing the stretch of that muscle, because it covers the knee and the ankle, versus the lower muscle. It's mainly a stretch when your knee is bent, and then you're just isolating the ankle by itself without the knee in a straight position. But those two muscle groups need to be strengthened differently, because when your knee is straight, you'll hit that upper muscle as you go up onto your toes and lift your heels. And when your knee is bent, then you'll hit that lower muscle and you'll isolate that one a little bit more specifically. And when you're in that athletic position, you're using that soleus muscle a little bit more as you're in that squat position, and you're using your calves and your feet to kind of move side to side. So it's a muscle that doesn't get strengthened as much for people who are in that athletic position, or pickleballers that would be out there in that squat position. Squats would be good. Increasing their back muscle strength would be good, just because as you're bent over in that position, you place so much in front of you and you're reaching down, there's fatigue that'll take place. So getting those muscles stronger will be good. And then ultimately, like, trying to build yourself up of having good form. As you have good form, when you start to lose your form, you're locking your knees, you're bending over at the hips, you're starting to hit more balls into the net, because we've all seen those people that are bent over, and their paddle path can't get them to clear the net very well. At that point, it's probably close to you needing to take a break, stretch, or maybe shut down, because you're probably going to be more sore the longer you push through that.
I think we would be amiss if we did not mention too, Ken, I think you and Vicki cover this with y'all's beginners a lot. And I've been playing 5 years. I always heard this the first couple years, that one of the most common injuries was backpedaling with a lob ball over the head, and just people throw their head up, start taking a few steps back, and then trip and fall. And I know there's a lot of people that know about that injury on the court, but there's a lot of new people coming in. I think it's something people ought to focus on, like from the get-go, turning and running like that outfielder, turn your shoulders and run back, almost like a receiver going after a football. and stood of the back pedal and then tripping and then trying to catch yourself and breaking wrists and stuff like that. Have you seen some of that, Craig? Or did you see some of that in your...
I haven't seen any in the clinic, but I've seen it. I've been like you guys. I've seen it where you see a newer player that maybe doesn't have some of that athletic background or doesn't have that experience of turning their hips and going backwards in that direction and trying to anticipate the path of that ball and where it's going to land, either trying to take it out of the air or trying to get to that ball on the bounce and then trying to position that ball for their swing. And I've definitely seen people who they get moving faster backwards than they can control. And then you see somebody go down. And then, of course, you're not only worried about the hip, the back injury, but also the concussion that could take place if they go down and they have a head injury.
Yeah, and once you get that proper footwork down, if you turn and run the right direction, and it really doesn't take a whole lot to learn that. You just got to work on it just a little bit. You got a lot of time, a lot more time than if you try to throw your head up and backpedal.
Yeah, usually when you backpedal, things go bad really quickly. Absolutely. Yeah. We've definitely seen it. And I mean, so you could turn that into a drill very easily.
Oh yeah.
Where you can have a partner sit there and lob something and then work on some of that footwork going back and not even necessarily swinging, but just getting to the place of where it's going to land and bounce and just get used to that and not even worry about the swing and just break that drill up into segments and then, piece them together until you complete it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jeff, that's a good point. And Vicki and I taught several classes, a dozen or more classes through the year. And a lot of our participants in the beginner class were really couch to pickleball type of people who had been possibly athletic at one point in their life, or some were non-athletic, but heard about pickleball and felt this was a good way to to have some athletics in their lives, some motion in their lives. And that's one of the things that we taught from class one is in your mind, you think you can get to a ball and let it go. Just don't try to put too much into going for those shots that are just out of reach, because that's what happens. You still think of yourself being able to get to a ball out of reach, and you can lose control and fall. And that's where injuries take place.
Absolutely.
No doubt.
Absolutely.
We've all been there.
But I'll tell you, Craig, what you provided us was so much detail. And not only did we want to know what are some of the more common injuries, and one is overuse, right? You're just pushing a muscle too much too soon, or you have muscles that might be compensating for other weaker muscles and you end up straining one. But you made some good points of dynamic stretching before you start. And we get out to pickleball and there's two people on a court and you jump on, you warm up, you hit 3 balls. Come on, let's play. Everybody wants to play right away. And dynamic stretching 5-10 minutes before you start is really very important, especially when you get above 50 years of age. Your muscles just don't have that elasticity that they used to have. And you also brought up some great points too about proper equipment, making sure you got the right shoes, the right paddle. And if you need an ankle support, a knee support, there's nothing wrong with having that, just to help prevent anything from going wrong. So you really gave us some great detail on preventative information.
Yeah,
awesome,
it's
guys.
not
I
uncommon.
appreciate you having me.
Oh, goodness. And I was going to say, Craig, it's not uncommon in our group that we see somebody come out with an ankle brace on, 2 knee braces, and elbow to wrap around their waist.
Oh, yeah. No,
They have
you
more
see somebody come out
they
and
have-
are they coming out for pickleball or are they getting a skateboard?
Exactly. I need a helmet myself, but
Absolutely. Yeah. It's funny. And then you see the people that they start off and they've got nothing on, but an hour later they start to suit up.
that's right.
Mhm.
That's right.
Mhm.
And we can get a good laugh at it, but it is frightening when it happens. And then when you realize that somebody's truly injured themselves, it's just devastating. And we hate to see anybody out for any length of time. We've actually had several surgeries because of injuries. Some of them also are repeat surgeries on knees I think we must have probably at least 3 or 4 people that have had multiple surgeries on their knees. So that those knee injuries are really seem to be very chronic. So
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, and I've seen some people with some knee replacements that get out there and they're like, "Oh, I can play." And the differentiation between I can hit the ball and you can play a game the way that you want to play or a match the way that you want to play. And we all know that hitting the ball around is one thing, but then once you start taking score, the mentality changes pretty drastically.
Mhm.
And then you're
Yeah.
trying to get to those shots, like Ken said, that you shouldn't have got to. And you turn off that it's a business decision. I should have let that one go. And then your ego kicks in and things kind of go south. So seeing people get back to things prematurely is really kind of a deficit because the intention is to go out and just kind of move around and maybe drill a little bit. And now all of a sudden we got three, we need four. And, oh, sure, I'll do it. And what happens to somebody who's like, oh, well, I probably should have said no. So getting back, making sure, I mean, I would like to see that people can check their boxes of, can they drill? Can they move around? Can they get the right form before they start really trying to push the level of play? So that they can have a better sense of injury prevention by making sure that they're mentally checking those boxes. Can I do it, and does it look right? And if you can't, then you probably need to think second, longer about that decision.
Craig, being a longtime athlete, do you have a couple of dynamic stretches you would recommend that we do before jumping into our first game?
I mean, generally, you're looking at some of the movements. So, pickleball, you're in a squat position. You're having to do lateral movements. So, some of the drills you might have done from tennis, where if you get on a court and you're doing some straight plane movements forward and backwards, you're doing some lateral plane movements, straight plane side to side. And then you start mixing in some rotational movements. Start making sure that you're bending. So, are you doing some suicides? Not fast, but can you reach down and touch a line and then touch the other line on a court? Because when you go to lunge and reach for that drop shot, are you going to be able to get down like you do for that suicide motion, like you would trying to get to that drop shot right before, it hits the ground? Are you able to reproduce some of those typical motions you might do in a game and at least condition your body or warm your body up for some of those same movements, as opposed to most of us get out there and we warm up a little bit and they're like, oh, it's a warm-up game. So, and then don't treat it like a warm-up game. We treat it like our third or fourth game.
right.
So things of that nature. One of the things that I've seen myself do is that I tend to, as I get more tired as I'm playing for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, is that I tend to stretch my calves a lot frequently throughout the time, because if I'm losing my motion and mobility at my ankles, then I start to lock my knees. As I lock my knees, I start to hinge at the hips. Then I can feel I'm getting a little tight in my back. I'm getting a little tight in my hips. And, that usually starts with my calves. So I tend to start stretching my calves first. And then as I notice that I haven't stretched enough, I'll feel some of that. And then I'm stretching my back out a little bit, or I might get into a deep squat. You might have seen me out there, Ken, where I'm in a deep squat, kind of lunging down and stretching my calves, stretching my back out. And from there, I'll stand up and I'll pull my foot to my butt so I can stretch my quad and my hip flexor. And those tend to be three of the areas that I get the tightest in because of that constant forward position that I'm in. So calves, back, and then hip flexors. Your hamstrings and your glutes, you're bent over. You're getting a good stretch on those pretty frequently, but you tend to bend and hinge at the hips a whole lot. So I try to open those back up and then stretch the calves and then loosen up my back and get a little bit of rotation because the fatigue and a little tightness in through there. But I would say my calves and my hip flexors are probably the two things that get me first.
Craig, thanks so much for coming on. I mean, that was so much detail, not just on preventative, but if you are injured, you need to see a professional like yourself so you can figure out what the problem is and what you need strengthened. So thanks so much for coming on. We really appreciate your time.
Great information. Thank you.
Awesome.
We appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'll see you on the courts.
You
Sounds
will.
bet.
great.
Thanks,
All right.
Craig. Have a
Okay,
good night.
bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, that was a great interview with Craig Teeter, the physical therapist. And now it's time as always, for Jeff's Burr Under My Saddle.
You're a burr under my saddle. You're a thorn sticking in my side.
All right, folks. This week's a little bit more serious. Burr under my saddle. It's not anything mind shaking or anything like that we don't need to discuss. But you're always looking to get into rec games with the best players that you can get into with. Most people, especially from a intermediate and on up. If you're lucky enough to get into a game with a really good player, there's a few things that you don't want to do. That good player is coming into the game. He's wanting to work on some stuff. He's wanting a good game, especially if he has a weaker player with him. Do not hit every ball, people, to that weak player, because then you got the higher level player that's over there not getting any balls. Why in the heck would he want to get in a game like that where you don't get to hit any balls? So that's the first thing. The second thing is, if you're able to get that high level player to come and play in a game with you, test yourself against him. Hit drop shots to his side. Hit dinks to his side. Don't just go against a weaker player to try to score points and win the game. Because mainly what you're going to do is, you do that to that player, he or she is not going to want to play with you the next time. So the burr under my saddle this week is, quit worrying about trying to win games so much. If you're fortunate enough to get a high-level player in the game with you, give that person some balls. And if you do, they'll probably want to play with you again. All right, that's this week's Burr Under My Saddle.
All right, Jeff, thank you for that, Burr. And as always, it's time for...
Hey, bud, I've got a shout out. All righty. I just want to thank Craig for being with us today and for all that valuable information that he gave us. It's a lot. And he even did his homework to come and be with us, which was really nice because he had a lot of wonderful information. But along with that, I want to thank Bruce and Ross. And hopefully I'm not forgetting any other of our medical people out there at the courts. Big shout out to all of you guys, because you're always so willing to answer questions when we do have problems, or we need a recommendation of a doctor or a therapy or whatever. You guys are always really willing to listen to us and help everybody out and make what recommendations you can. And we appreciate it. Thank you. Back to you, bud.
Vicki, thanks for those shout outs. And now, hot off the press, it's time for Ken's tournament previews.
Hey, thanks, bud. Time for tournament preview, and we are chocked full. Get a piece of paper and pencil because we got a lot of information today. January 2024, January 27th, a one-day tournament. It's called Checkmate, and it's a fundraiser for the Bayside Academy chess team at W.O. Lott Park in Daphne, Alabama. It's $30 per person. Go to pickleballbrackets.com, and that's January 27th. We're going to back up a little bit. January 13th, it's the Smoke and Stroke. This is at the Exchange. Terry Lampress is putting this on. We have a flyer we'll put on the screen for this. It's January 13th, the Smoke and Stroke. The same weekend, January 12th through 14th, this is the Pickleball 24. This is in Pensacola. It's at the University of West Florida. Go to pickleballbrackets.com. There's 24 courts. You're going to have singles on Friday, mixed gender doubles on Saturday, and mixed doubles on Sunday. Again, that's January 12th through 14th in Pensacola. Going to February 2nd through 4th, this is the Winter Blast Pickleball Tournament. This is going to be in It's going to be in Mooney Park at Fort Walton Beach, Florida. We're going to put the URL at the bottom of the screen. It's a fairly long URL. It's both mixed and gender doubles, again, at Mooney Park in Fort Walton Beach, Florida, February 2nd through 4th. February 13th through 15th is the Pickleball Jamboree. This will be at the Foley Event Center. Registration is open. Go to pickleballbrackets.com. There's both gender doubles and mixed doubles, and there's already 27 people registered for that tournament. Also in February, the 23rd through 25th is the Canebrake Country Club Pickleball Tournament. There are 12 dedicated pickleball courts. Go to pickleballbracket.com. This will be in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Check it out. February 27th through March 3rd, Paddles at the Plex. Registration has opened. There's already 35 people registered. Go to pickleballbrackets.com. This tournament will pull in upwards of 700 in it. We've played in it the last 2 or 3 years, and that is a great facility. It's in Opelika, Alabama. It's Paddles at the Plex. Going to March 2024, let's see, the 15th through the 17th, this is the Mississippi Senior Games at Pops Ferry in Biloxi, Mississippi. We don't have a URL yet, but save the date. The same weekend, this is Paddles on St. Patty's Day. This will be at Pelican Park in Mandeville, Louisiana. We'll put a URL at the bottom of the screen. Basically, you'll go to Pelican Park registration website for registering for that tournament. Staying in March 22nd through 24th at Cross Gates is the Pickle in the Dell. Last year, you registered through pickleballbrackets.com. Registration has not opened yet, but we'll keep on top of that and make sure that if it's changed from Pickleball Brackets that we post the new URL. March 29th and 30th is the Alabama Open, Clay, Alabama. Again, go to pickleballbrackets.com to register for that. Moving to April 2024, April 12th through 14th in Hattiesburg, Mississippi at Tatum Park is the Young Life Organization and the USM Wesley Foundation tournament hosted by Marlena Martis. This will have a family night, open play on Friday, gender doubles on Saturday, and mixed doubles on Sunday. Also the same weekend, April 12th through 14th, is the Alabama Senior Games in Opelika, Alabama. Go to pickleballbrackets.com to register. April 20th through 21st is the second annual Dinking in the Delta. This is in Greenwood, Mississippi at Wagner Park. $50 registration fee. There's two basically brackets, 3-5 and under and 4-0 plus. You're guaranteed 3 matches per event. Men's, women's doubles on Saturday, mixed doubles on Sunday. Now, here's a little further out in 2024, but it's the save the date. October 4th through 6th is the Louisiana Senior Games. This is at the Legacy in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So this in 2024 is a qualifying year for nationals, which will be held in Des Moines, Iowa in the summer of 25. So in 2024, you'll have singles, gender doubles, and mixed doubles. And finally, October 25th through 27th in Baton Rouge, Louisiana will be the Hollow Wheel. You'll have women's doubles on Friday, mixed doubles on Saturday, and men's doubles on Sunday. Registration will open in April. If you played in the tournament in last year in 2023, you'll have 1 week to register before registration opens for everyone. A lot of tournaments to cover this time. I also have an email address at the bottom of the screen. If you have any information about your tournament, please send me an email. That's it for now. Back to you, bud.
All right, Ken, thanks for those previews of those tournaments. And now, if nobody has anything else, I think it's time to say goodnight. Good night, everybody.
Good night. See you on the court.
Hey, from the Pickleball Crew, thanks for watching, and we'll see you all next week. Well, that's it for this episode. We hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave any comments and please like and subscribe to our channel. Thanks again and see you next week.